Well, good morning, everybody. This is Ryan Bohl, a senior Middle East and North Africa analyst here at the RAIN Network, and I'm here with our cybersecurity analyst, Ali Plusinski, who will be discussing with us spyware and cyber warfare and other cyber espionage within the Middle East, and particularly between Israel and the United States, and some of the dynamics that we're seeing going on there. Ali, why don't you start us off? There's been a recent a Biden administration ruling on that has particularly affected the Israelis in the cyber realm. Can you walk us through some of the details on that?
Absolutely, Ryan. So this past week, we saw the Biden administration announce an executive order against the use of commercial spyware by U.S. government agencies. There were some stipulations to this ban. It's not outright against all use of commercial spyware. However, it is against any spyware that either has demonstrated evidence that it could be used for counterintelligence purposes or otherwise has been linked to different kinds of human rights abuses. So our listeners may have heard about Pegasus spyware, for example, from the very infamous Israeli firm, the NSO Group, which sort of had its spotlight, for lack of a better word, about a year or two ago in terms of the number of stories that began to pop up about the widespread proliferation of the spyware on devices all across the globe being used by a number of governments for questionable purposes, for surveillance against journalists, other human rights activists, political dissidents. And some of these spywares are extraordinarily sophisticated. In the case of Pegasus, what makes it especially unique is its zero-click function, which, unlike other kinds of malware or spyware that sort of require user engagement, for example, through some kind of social engineering attack, wherein, for example, I may reach out to you with a link that you then click on, and that would sort of result in the spyware being deployed on your device. What makes Pegasus and some of these other more military-grade spywares really unique is that they don't even need any kind of user engagement. So I could just send you a text message with the payload of the spyware, and it could be deployed on your mobile device without you ever even knowing or really being able to do anything to defend against it. So the issue of spyware has really risen to prominence in the last several years. And during this recent Biden administration announcement, they also revealed that more than 50 U.S. officials in more than 10 different countries had actually also been victimized by the use of spyware, which was a much higher number than we had previously thought. So the industry itself has really just sort of run rampant in the absence of any kind of regulation. Not only are we seeing it being used by the public sector, by different governments, but we have also seen it bleed into the private sector. There was a Reuters investigation about 6 months ago that unveiled how different Indian law firms were using these hack-for-hire or commercial spyware products to spy on other litigation or other sides of the court process to try and help their court case. So, there's a lot of implications to the industry, and I think that this step will hopefully rein in some of the activity that we've seen around the world.
Right, and we've also seen some of this technology end up in Saudi hands and Emirati hands, and they've been used to target dissidents within those countries, as well as some of their own citizens abroad. So we know that the American concerns about some of this technology, kind of goes back to some of those scandals that happened in 2019 and 2020. I think it was Dark Raven was the or was it Dark Matter project in
Dark
the Emirates,
matter.
and Project Raven, where they hired former U.S. intelligence agents and use this technology against their own dissidents. So, Israel has this wider strategy of being willing to trade this somewhat abusable technology to countries it's courting. So part of its courtship of the Emirates was, we'll give you this spying technology that you can use to monitor your own dissidents, and that will build trust that would eventually culminate in normalization, as we saw in 2020. But we've also got this interesting angle of U.S.-Israeli relations. And, Ali, how familiar are you with some of the stories of Israeli spying on the United States?
I was doing some deep dives this morning into current U.S.-Israeli relations, Ryan, but of course you are the expert on all things related to Israel. But I did think that the aspect of this recent ban and the overall relationship between the United States and Israel on the topic of spyware is really interesting because Israel is one of the top, arguably the most sophisticated producer of these spyware technologies. I mean, the NSO Group is perhaps the most well-known example, but there's a number of other Israeli intelligence firms that have produced similar models of spyware. And this ban is coming in the midst, which you would be much more familiar with, in sort of cooling relations between the U.S. and Israel to some degree. So I wanted to point the question to you, Ryan, about how maybe this recent announcement by the Biden administration fits into this more broad U.S.-Israel relationship right now.
Right. And like the US, when relations were close between Israel and the United States, the Israelis did spy on the Americans. And there's always the infamous USS Liberty incident during the 67 war, where the Israelis strafed an American spy frigate. And the result was not a breakdown in Israeli relations because the strategic drivers of the relationship were still strong. And as a result, the United States would tolerate occasional Israeli spies stealing secrets from the U.S. defense establishment and bringing them back to Israel. They would prosecute the spies individually, but it generally didn't result in a disruption in relations. And this Biden ban is coming on the backdrop of something of it's not quite to the point where it's a crisis, but it's a slow degradation of relations between Israel and the U.S. And that's driven by multiple things. We have a new Netanyahu government. Netanyahu personal history with Biden, having been part of the Obama administration. Netanyahu and Obama didn't get along on a number of issues, from Palestine to the Iran nuclear deal. So there's a personal history there, but there's also bigger strategic dynamics, which is the U.S. simply isn't as interested in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. It's not interested in the Middle East the way that it was 10 or 20 years ago. And that's leaving Israel on its own. And it's looking for other partners, like it has with the Abraham Accords, which fits into its trading away, Pegasus to the Saudis and the Emiratis to build these Abraham Accords as backups or replacements for the close American partnership that it used to have. And the Biden administration is becoming more and more comfortable with creating that distance between Israel and the U.S. Israel used to characterize itself as the best American ally outside of NATO. And nowadays, we just seen recent statements from Netanyahu and others that, if Israel has to stand on its own, it'll find a way to stand on its own. If the United States is going to be too critical of it on an issue, Israel will assert its own interests. And that is a substantial change in rhetoric from the past. And it's very interesting to consider these small tactical developments, like in the cyber realm, which on its face looks like the United States simply trying to safeguard its own secrets, but it's also directly impacting a close ally whose espionage and counterintelligence and intelligence operations it used to tolerate as somewhat of the price of doing business. In fact, it was a way that the Americans and Mossad would build up tradecraft, was to do spy games against one another. It was a safe place where they knew their agents wouldn't be thrown into a prison cell where they'd be executed. That is now changing, where I think America's tolerance of some of this Israeli behavior will decline, and they'll be more likely to prosecute, more likely to expel, and be more defensive in regards to this old relationship with Israel. Now, that could change with political change. If we have a Republican return to power next year in 2024's elections, the relations could return to really close ties. But that's still a change, because now the state of the Israeli-American relationship is dependent on who's in the White House. And it used to be a bipartisan consensus. Now it's starting to become more and more of a partisan issue. So it's some really interesting things going on here. And the wider strategic dynamics of what's happening in the cyber realm in MENA is probably one of our more tumultuous regions. Obviously, since the invasion of Ukraine, the Russians have really stepped up a lot of their activities globally and have become a little bit more of a malign actor. But the Middle East is one of those places where the cyber realm is a place where adversaries that would like to shoot each other, but know that if they did so, that would escalate to a war they don't want. This is a place where they lash out against one another. And we're going to continue to track those issues and the way that they develop. And of course, how extra regional powers like the United States, react to that behavior and what they do to protect themselves. I'm going to open it up to the floor if there's any questions from anybody who's viewing right now. If there's anything for Ali or myself on either Israeli-American relations or cyber, the cyber realm in the Middle East. And if not, that's all we've got time for today. Maybe we'll get some questions and some comments later on as this does get reposted. Ali, thank you so much for joining me.
Ryan, thank you for the great discussion.